Kia ora whanau. Welcome back to Voice of Aroha on Wellington Access Radio. This show is sponsored by and supported by Host International New Zealand, Wellington Access Radio, and Changemakers Refugee Forum. Today, we are really excited to be joined with the New Zealand Trade Relations Commissioner, Mr. Foon. Is that how I said it right?
Yeah, Meng, Foon, yeah, all good.
Foon. Yeah.
Awesome.
So yeah, I've been like reading your bio and you have an amazing bio. And I'm just gonna highlight one of the points that I got that stood out for me. As 2019, you were the only mayor in New Zealand that is actually fluent in Te Reo Maori, which is quite impressive. And I was so blown away by that. And I just leave the microphone to you to actually introduce yourself, tell us who you are and what your role is all about.
Yeah, kia ora, everybody, and thank you to the Voice of Aroha, ka mihi ora wātu ki a koutou, e whakarongo mai nei ki tēnei hōtaka, the Voice of Aroha. Thanks for the introduction, thanks for the welcome, Maris, and thanks for the invitation. It's awesome to be on your radio station to chat about what my role is and what do we do. My role is the Race Relations Commissioner, and I am tasked to maintain and enhance harmonious communities. And it's a very broad platform of work that we do. I'm part of the Human Rights Commission alongside with the Chief Commissioner, the Disabilities Commissioner, and also the Equal Employment Commissioner. So we work collegially together. We have a strategic plan and a business plan, and we are an independent Crown entity, which we are here to work for our people across Aotearoa, and must state that our jurisdiction is Aotearoa. We don't talk about other people's matters in other countries, although that I know that the events in other countries do affect harmonious communities here. It causes anxiety in Aotearoa because we have over 200 different ethnicities living in Aotearoa, probably one of the most diverse countries in the world with over 300 different dialects. And we have our offices in Wellington, Auckland, Christchurch. We have a staff around about 60 and employing more because the government's actually asked us to do some more work on the social cohesion, what is social cohesion and what is inclusion amongst our communities. And that's a very broad subject in itself. And so that's just a brief introduction of myself. Well, my role, actually, not myself. But if you want me to talk about myself, I can go for another half an hour about myself.
Very welcome. Very welcome.
Thank you.
It's just amazing to have you here today. It's just also another opportunity that we can ask some questions, that we can provide more knowledge about the rule. So I would love to start this. Basically, I hear too much about the Human Rights Commissioner and Race Commission as well. What kind of differences between them?
Well, I think we all are part of the Human Rights Act, and we all do human rights work, and we want to ensure that there is equality in our country. We want to ensure that the human rights of our country are available to everyone, and that they're implemented fairly, mainly by the government in the first instance, and by organizations and businesses. People that contravene the human rights are held to account by the Human Rights Commission or other UNESCO and like Amnesty International. They do work as well. So there's a whole lot of organizations out there that actually can hold the government to account. Even people like yourselves or the Salvation Army or the many non-government organizations, and people that could be whistleblowers. We're here to keep people safe, live a good life, enjoy the freedoms, like freedom of speech it's a pretty big thing at the present time. It's going through Parliament. What is freedom of speech? We know that freedom of speech is not only freedom of speech, but it actually comes with responsibilities. Whatever we do, whatever we say, it comes with responsibilities. And I think that's what people need to grapple with when they open their mouth. There's going to be people that don't agree, and they've got to accept that there is positive debate on those matters. My portfolio is to respond to March 15th, and including the Royal Commission of Inquiry with the 44 recommendations. I'm also keen on education, the right to education, because the right to education at the present time is not afforded to everyone. And unfortunately, for one reason or another, only 60% of our children actually go to school on any given day, and 40% of the school average, this is according to the Education Review Office, that they receive bullying. So bullying is very bad at school. It's toxic, and probably that's sometimes why some children don't actually go to school, but it's not the only reason. The other part I have mandate over is tangata whenua, work with tangata whenua and all ethnic groups in our society in New Zealand, plus work with religious groups. And so, yeah, we've got some pretty big projects on at the present time. One of them is called the National Action Plan Against Racism. We hope that people will visit the website, or maybe organise a Zoom if they wish to contribute to the National Action Plan Against Racism. It is going to be owned by the government. It's going to be implemented by the government and monitored and evaluated by the government. This is a big piece of work, and it's an investment in organisations. Why we say it's an investment in organisations, because culture of an organisation will always eat strategy for breakfast, which in the simplest term, I can give you an analogy. An example is that if mum and dad don't get on well at home, then they'll end up with generally half a house. So that's how disruptive personal grievances, sexual harassment, racial discrimination in organizations, which they need to be very mindful of and make sure that it doesn't happen, or if it does happen, that they actually deal with it fairly and swiftly and fairly. And so, yeah, there's a broad range of work there, Kogan.
You mentioned education, and I was really interested to hear more about how the Commission responds to racism in schools and goes beyond sort of just the narrative of unconscious bias and goes into more kind of the entrenched racism that we have in New Zealand institutions. How does the Commission respond to that?
Yeah, the Commission, I respond in a number of ways. We choose parts that we respond to, and we're more keen on the bullying and discrimination part. The other part, we had a debate in one of the rooms at the Beehive was on uniforms and culture, how schools need to change to allow the culture of children and the culture of uniforms and their beliefs to be actually safe at school. That's a very important part of a student's environment to strive and thrive. And so there are some schools that still balk at students wearing, small cross on their as a necklace, because some schools says no jewelry at all, but they, say that the cross is a jewelry, or more particularly nowadays, A lot of our children, more particularly Māori, are having tāmoko on their bodies as symbols of their whakapapa and culture. So those sort of thing, those types of cultural aspects need to be respected, because in the Human Rights Act, people have the right to education. They also have the right to language and the right to culture and the right to be safe. And so we are going to develop a guideline for the Ministry of Education for the schools. And we hope to have that roundabout by Christmas, hopefully. It's not going to be long, maybe 5 or 6 pages at the most. But just to give the schools the knowledge that culture, safety, and the right to education, they are human rights. And so human rights is not just for adults either, it's also for everyone, including babies and students and teenagers and elderly people. We're working with Kiva. I have found Kiva. Have you ever heard of Kiva?
No.
No, Kiva is it's a program which is owned by the University of Victoria, KVIA. You might want to do that Google now. You have to put in Kiva bullying. And what it does is actually is a program that it helps to manage racism, helps to eliminate racism. So the general bullying part in schools is 40%. And in the schools that actually take up the Kiva program, they are around about 15% of bullying. So that's a big difference. And I've been lobbying with them, for them in the Ministry of Education. We've been very appreciative of Rata Foundation down in the South Island, who has given quite a bit of money to support the Kiva program in schools. At the present time, they have, the Ministry of Education have a program called PB4L, which is a anti-bullying program as well. And they also have Bullying Week, which they support. But however, since they've implemented the program, the bullying has gone up for one reason or another. But Kiva is actually working. And I've been in the job 2 years, and ever since I came into the commission, I was made aware of Kiva. We investigated it. We looked at their stats. We looked at the ministry's stats, and there's no comparison. So those are some of the aspects there. And I'm available to talk to children, students at any time. I love visiting schools. There has been a few incidences where, unfortunately, the teachers have slipped up in terms of being racist. One school had a project, a play and or an act, and Ching Chong Chinaman was the prize. And another school had the N-word said several times, and the student says, look, you shouldn't say that, miss. And so she taped it and put it on the social media. And like I say, you know, it comes with consequences, and hence that teacher went on for stress leave for a little while. So we deal with a whole lot of things, but we're here mainly to support schools as much as possible, because I think there are 2 parts that will help our society, housing and education. We also were active in the area of pushing for New Zealand history to be in the education system. So that's going to be coming up in 2022. And so that's great that New Zealand is going to learn about New Zealand history alongside with international history.
That is really cool. You obviously do a lot of work with ethnic communities and tangata whenua, and I was wondering if any of that work does involve bringing those 2 communities together, because oftentimes I think, especially with the former refugee community, they are kind of segregated from tangata whenua, and there is very little understanding of Maori and their place in Aotearoa. And I was wondering if your role as Race Relations Commissioner doesn't include that as well.
Yeah, I'm quite hopeful. I know it's more difficult for the adults, but I do know that the children do participate in Māori culture at schools. Some of them have waiata, they have the school haka sometimes. And so I know that the Multicultural New Zealand, which is inclusive of whichever category of immigrant we come from, they have Huarahi Ho, which is a pathway to learn more about Māori, to work with Māori. But more particularly, we are working with some iwi up in the north, and they want to actually have newcomers get an understanding of New Zealand Māori in the first place, tangata whenua, when they apply for their visa. So when they apply for their visa, there'll be a drop box and it'll say something about Te Tiriti of Waitangi, probably 1835, that there are Māori and iwi in our country. But not only that, but it will talk about some of the New Zealand laws as values of New Zealand, like the freedom of speech, the right to human rights, the right for LGBTQI people to be married, you can't do conversion therapy, you can't force your children not to be who they want. The legal age for voting is 18. We are a democracy. We have diverse religions, so there will be a bit more information going into the future. And then later on too, return is that when the people want to apply for their permanent residency, then they will need to actually connect with the local iwi in their area, and go to the marae and learn a bit more about tangata whenua before they can be accepted as a permanent resident. So there's some prerequisites. So it'll be helpful, I think, because I think for a lot of immigrants now, tangata whenua are quite invisible. They don't know how to engage, other than seeing some Māori people walking along the street or maybe in their workplace. So we hope some of these interventions and educational aspects will actually enhance the relationship between newcomers and tangata whenua.
That's right. What you said before was it resonates to my own story, because I actually got to New Zealand when I was in my 20s. And it was so hard until like a month ago when I went and stayed at Marae, and I was welcomed. I feel like after 6 years, I was welcomed and I felt like accepted. And that was my first experience with the tangata whenua, and me and my own journey understanding Maori history, Maori culture, and Maori point of view. I just want to touch on what you said before about responsibilities. Most of the time when we talk about human rights, we say it's my right, but we never acknowledge the fact that we also have responsibilities. You said that we have 200 plus different ethnic groups in Aotearoa, New Zealand. So my question is, how could we live together as a society that is so diverse? And how do we take those responsibilities, and what those responsibilities look like?
Well, it can be a complex question answer, and it can be quite easy. I mean, at the present time, we're living in this one country called Aotearoa, New Zealand, right? And so we cohabitate together. When you go to the school, it's not just a monoculture in terms of a lot of schools nowadays. It used to be mono. It used to be just all Pākehā culture. But now there are different cultures that are able to actually celebrate at school in the first instance. You know, you got your Māori culture, you got your Pacific, you got your Chinese New Year stuff, you got your Colour Day, Diwali. You got a whole lot of different celebrations. Interestingly enough, the different diverse cultures that come into our country, they bring a variety of different food that we try and consume literally on a daily basis. I do like white food, but I do like other people's food as well. And it's interesting that food festivals and food at the supermarket is so different to what it was back 20, 30 years, 40 years ago. The way I think the first different food that arrived in New Zealand was Chinese after European and Maori food. And so, you know, Chinese takeaway. And the funny thing is that people might say, hey, you Chinamen, go home, go back to your country. And then the next thing they'll go down to the takeaway and get a Chinese takeaway. And so then, you know, we've had the Dalmatian food, the Italian food. And, you know, through food, the language is so diverse in itself. You know, pizza. You know, you think that's an English word, but that's actually an Italian word. Or, you know, kosher food is Jewish, and naan bread is, you know, from India. Tom Tum is Thai, and all the different wines like Pinot Noir and Sauvignon Blanc, and different cheeses from Pecorino to cheddar to brie. All different foods provide the different languages. So I think as time goes on, we're very receptive of each other. I think we're generally very kind people in Aotearoa. My parents came to New Zealand with the shirt on their back, and they were able to make it. It has taken a while, and obviously, you know, there's obviously a bit of racism in between their journey, but overall, they've had a great life in Aotearoa. And the other part too is that marriage. Now, got nearly gone are the days is that I have to, you know, my children have to marry Chinese kids. I know that my parents who are a little bit older says, yeah, Meng, you got to marry Chinese people. You're not going to be choosing your own. We're going to choose one for you. And so I am part of a arranged marriage. I try to impart those values to my children, and they said, hey, Dad, we'll fix our own up. Thank you very much. And so they all marry different people. And I think our nation is built in the bedroom. And I think the diversity will continue. I think love has no boundaries. And, you know, through marriage, through food, through the culture of school, through the workplace, through, you know, the different religious beliefs that we have, we are definitely have a multicultural Aotearoa, but we're not actually multicultural in ourselves.
Very well said, and especially you know all those names of those foods, which is just made me hungry. And but you know that was also good, and for the listeners, support your local business in this time of COVID. Is a great message as well. I have a question want to ask about. You mentioned earlier about the freedom of speech. There is a lot of also voices in a society that is afraid from the current hate law that will taking place. How we will differentiate between the freedom of speech, that right that every human have to practice it, and to avoid from the hate speech, despite the fact that we are the very different society, very not different, sorry, diverse society, within our differences, how we can practice this in the right way?
Well, New Zealanders are very good at protesting. There's been a number of huge protests in New Zealand, and the freedom of speech is really exercised there. They're the social political changes of Aotearoa. But what has crept in is actually hate that incites violence. Generally, New Zealanders, you will know that when they protest, they don't go and smash everything up like I see in America or in other countries where they burn buildings and that. We just march down the street, and you can even see, for Maori, for instance, when they had all of the land in 1840, and they really have only got 4% now because the government's taken most of it away, all of it away. That they are not violent people, as I've seen it during their protests. They believe in that their right to land, their right to language, their right to culture, and they have actually marched vigorously, holding banners and marching from the top of the North Island right down to the Beehive in Wellington during the land marches, which our children will learn at school. And but the hate part is the one that's sort of the government's been a bit hesitant in reforming hate speech, but it's really come apart in the last sort of like 10 years that more particularly in the internet, and different people saying different things, and they inciting violence. Inciting violence is a big issue, and it could cause harm to people. It could cause harm to property, and but it's a high bar there, Cadron, that the government and the Human Rights Commission accepts that it is a high bar, because it's actually better to know who is actually out there saying things rather than squashing it all down and actually putting it underground. At least we can say, oh, that's that group over there. They don't actually like us, but they're inciting violence, and then the police can do something about it. But if these threshold is too low, that you can't even say, hey, I hate you, it doesn't mean that I'm going to kill you. I hate you. I don't like your religion, or I don't like the way you look at me. That is freedom of speech, but that didn't incite violence, and it has to, the threshold needs to be high. It's one of those very fundamental things that we have in New Zealand and in other parts of the world where the freedom of speech is absolute. But it does come with responsibilities, no different to the people that invaded the White House the other time when the ex-president was about to move out. Someone incited violence, and they've caught some of them, and some of them are in jail. And so we just got to be mindful that there are people that hate, and they like to actually incite violence. And I hope the law will provide for those people.
Kia ora, that's well said, and thanks for sharing your views. Talking about diversity, and to me, diversity is to have a seat at the table. Inclusion is to have a seat at the table and also have your voice heard. What recommendations would you give to New Zealanders, to the government, to communities, to business owners, and to everyone in general to create these inclusive spaces for everyone?
Yeah, look, at the government level where there is a bit of control, we used to talk about diversity, and because most of the people around the table, at the board table, were all male Pākehā people, and the government says, look, we really need women in there. And then they reached the 50-50 threshold of women on boards, and that was a deliberate directive from the government. It doesn't happen accidentally, because if you left things without being deliberate, nothing will happen. people say, oh, yes, yes, that's a good idea, but nothing will happen. I can tell you that now. And so the government now has actually decreed that 20% of the boards shall be of ethnic Māori and Pacific. And so that increases the diversity of organizations. I know that at the coalface of work, generally it is very diverse. You have a look at when you go through customs at an airport, or when you go to the retail shops, or when you go into some of the businesses, they're very diverse. But there is still lacking of diversity at the public owned organizations like Air New Zealand, Fletcher's, those types of share market New Zealand stock exchange companies. They don't have diversity in terms of at the table making decisions. I think time goes on, as our country is more diverse, there will be more opportunities. I dare say that I'm going to credit myself by learning the Māori language when I was young. At 7 years old, we had a shop and I just took an interest in the Māori language. I think it's incumbent for everyone in Aotearoa to actually learn Māori, to start off without giving up their own language, which they're of their mother tongue. It's very important that we keep all of those, which is not easy to keep, because when we used to speak Chinese to our kids, they used to respond in English, which was annoying. But anyway, that's another story. But you know, I think through the government processes, we've got the most diverse parliament in the world, I think, in terms of a mixture of all sorts of people. It's not only diversity in colour, but also diversity in thinking as well. You don't want all this, you might have a diversity of people and they all think the same. You need to actually have different people that actually think differently and challenge and have good debates about what is the best outcome for and what is the best policy developments for Aotearoa. I mean, you know, I've seen a number of school prefects that are of ethnic, and it's awesome to actually see.
Definitely, it's amazing. And it's very important also to have that diversity in decision-making positions, powers within those organizations and governments, and in a way to ethnic people feel that they are valued, because it really, sometimes some people, some organizations, they try to diversify their organizations, but will make no meaning if their voice is not being taken into consideration, their opinion is not being really valued as an equal opinion within the same person who are in power.
Yeah,
I think
that's why I say be the boss. Be the boss and you can create your own thing.
Yeah, exactly. And we are believing this beautiful country, Aotearoa, we are heading toward that, because we are amazing communities who are working together, standing together in times of difficulties, like we witnessed in many events happening in those 2-3 years. That's how Aotearoa is strong. Just worrying about the time, we are coming on the end of this episode. Team, if you have no questions, is it time to give a final word?
Do have a final comment or question as well. You talked about Te Reo Māori as, you know, someone could take the opportunity to learn Te Reo, but it's not always the case. The accessibility of like a person to say like, look, I want to learn Te Reo, I'm going to enroll in the school. That hasn't been the case. And I can talk to myself in my own case that I've been like trying to learn Te Reo for 2 years. All the places has been like always taken, and it took me like 2.5 years to get a spot. So what recommendations could you give to the crown, to the government, to make, you know, Te Reo Māori, the language, more accessible to every New Zealander?
Yeah, well, first of all, I wish that Te Reo Māori was actually compulsory at schools, first and foremost. For adult learners, there is a lot of online online material, YouTube, internet. But I'm going to say one thing. It's fine to learn a language, but if you don't use it, you're likely to lose it as well. It's very key to a language. I think another good way could be to actually make friends with a Māori person who actually knows how to speak Māori, and yeah, share with them. And I think learn the language in context. Like I see you got a hat that you're wearing and glasses and a red jersey, a red sweatshirt, and you're in a radio station and you've got a tepu, which is a table, and you've got a turu, which is a chair. You've got a pōtai, which is your hat, and you've got your whatuwha, which is your four eyes, your glasses, karaihe. Just learn about the everyday stuff, the cup of tea, the cup of coffee. It's a lot of it's actually quite anglicized or transliterate, because Māori didn't actually have a lot of those things. But learn one sentence a day or one sentence a week and fill it up with verbs and nouns, and just have a practice. And yeah, I do encourage people, just learn the basics, and go to the marae if you can. If there's an event at the marae, like Orake Korako, not Orake, Ngāti Whātua, they have open days. Encourage your friends just to go and have a look, or go to the markets and they'll have rewana bread, and you say, great, that's like bread, right, okay. Or they might have teros, and those sorts of food that you might like to eat. And so you can always try them. So, but experience, I think the experience and learning in context. What do you want to know? Unless you're a scientist, why would you want to know words about lithium and sodium and or what's the point of that? Hey,
Exactly, Luis.
Keep it easy, brother. Keep it easy.
No, it's just amazing. Actually, it's a very practical advice, and it's a very easy way to learn. Especially ethnic people who speak 2-3 languages, could be very easy to learn another one. So we are coming to the end of the time. I just want to say a big thank you. Thank you for your time. That was just amazing corridor of today, and we have learned a lot about the rule, and also about some questions have to the governments and the other agencies to do more diversity. I will end up the show here, and thank you for the team for co-hosting today, and for listeners, keep watching our social media and listening. We will catch up for another episode with a new guest. Thank you so much for listening. Enjoy this song.
اسمري مالا مالا يا ماري مزيود دردي خمي وجنجاري اسمري مالا مالا يا ماري مزيود دردي خمي وجنجاري وبقى مايام دلي وبيالي سافر يا رفتا بشبر وقرشالي وبقى مايام يا